Really, I've heard from people who believe that the price of Tesla stock will reach $30,000 within the next 10 years or so. These people are obviously passionate about Tesla, but we are unable to verify their claims. Nevertheless, they own 100 shares and believe that they will become multimillionaires because that is their only hope, and it makes them happy, much like an eternal lottery ticket. They are also out in the community disputing any unbiased opinion that suggests that things might not turn out as well as they had hoped, and other people heed their confidence, which is supported by nothing but Elon's exaggeration. Most of you here, I'm sure, don't really think that Tesla will reach $30,000. And I don't mean to offend anyone, but I try to stay as close to the most likely and realistic range of possibilities as possible. There are plenty of shares available at $3,000. That is obviously a more realistic price. But even so, the value of the two biggest companies in the world has increased by more than 10 times from this point. In my opinion, we won't even be able to get there by the end of the decade with robot taxes. A $10 trillion valuation is a big one, for sure. One possibility for the future is that everyone will only use rover taxis as their primary mode of transportation, but nobody knows how the future will really work out, and in any case, not in the next 10 years at a valuation of $3,000. I believe we would need a ratio of 30 in that case, so something like $330 billion a year in net profit if each Revit actually brought in a net profit of $20,000 a year for Tesla. Then Tesla would need about 15 million of those operational generating said income. Well, that's not entirely true, as there are other sides of the business generating profit as well. Then there is this whole side of how Tesla will replace labor. It's another story that Elon has mentioned, and we have this idea that for about $20,000 or something, there will be a robot that can replace what humans can do, or perhaps more than a human, as it may be able to work harder, faster, stronger, smarter, and longer. Not to mention, we'll have a lot more knowledge and be a lot more intelligent in many ways. Yes, quite the story. It means Tesla could be worth well. This is how people get the idea of $30,000 stock price, with Elon saying things like he doesn't even know what an economy would look like by that stage, and we would live in abundance as robots can do all the work for us. And they cost virtually nothing compared to a full-time human. However, currently the robots are not able to replace any labor. In fact, they can barely walk and have probably cost in the region of about $50 million each, including the research. We have, however, seen them working on the Tesla production lines, doing various tasks. So we are a long way from replacing labor at a low cost, with no proof that we can actually get there other than excited, charismatic leader who's confident it can be achieved. But unfortunately, with a string of other ideas that have also not yet come to fruition, like solar batteries and self-driving robots. But there's also a string of successes, too, namely an EV that is able to be produced at a very low cost relative to everyone else, with a much higher offering that is the best-selling car in many markets, and other various successes in other businesses that help offer more faith in his future endeavors. And only one of these need to come in fruition, and the entire company will level up in a big way. These are big stories. And take Tesla to not the biggest company in the world, or even ever in history, but closer to the majority of the global GDP. Sort of big. I mean, does that sound believable? I mean, when we first heard about these robots, the community jumped to all sorts of conclusions of how they can replace so much labor, do better jobs than so many other humans. But there is potentially many orders of magnitude to reach until we're there. But Tesla may find some applications that are sufficient to replace labor in some areas and start from there. Also, if Tesla spots became as successful as Elon says, and Tesla becomes this company that dominates the world, it would all be under the assumption that governments may force Tesla to license the FSD technology for Apple robots, for example, even though there was no competition or government intervention. As for these absurd stock valuations, sure, there is a story of how they could reach that level, and you can make the math work. But you never know if the society for said events would work. Rubber taxes might not be for everyone. Or nearly everyone. A lot of people could give up owning a car right now and use Uber to save money. But people prefer to own their own cars, and they will even more so when they become more adept drivers. It doesn't matter how much more affordable transportation is. Becomes of robo-taxes. It might not mean more people give up their cars, but instead it competes with Uber and actual taxis along, and perhaps public forms of transport, like buses on top of that. If you can end up buying a brand new Tesla for around $20,000 after tax credits and subsidies. And then all the savings in fuel on top of that. Then Tesla is making the cost of owning a car lower. In addition to that, through manufacturing technology and software, said vehicle comes with a lot more features than you would likely find on a car that costs even 2 or 3 times as much, making it not only a lower cost vehicle to own, but one that is exceptionally better value, especially if it comes with FSD. In other words, perhaps demand for car ownership might increase as Tesla is able to offer a lower cost of ownership for a car. There's supposedly about 5 million active Uber drivers in the world, but Tesla could perhaps make 2 million rubber taxes a year. I guess one thing is we assume that the river taxes will be making about $30,000 a year or so and only cost less than $20,000 to manufacture. Well, what if Tesla dropped its rate significantly and each taxi only produced $10,000 a year? Then that would change things. It's still a good return for Tesla, 50 a year, but would then make robotaxing transportation very low cost anyway. Just because Tesla even sold robotaxis in some cities in some nations, it doesn't mean that profits will instantly go through the roof. However, if Tesla have 20 million cars on the road that are each paying $3,000 a year of FSD, then that's $60 billion a year and possibly an additional 5 or 10 million cars a year on top of that, or $20 billion a year income towards the end of the decade. Imagine your profits increasing $20 billion every year due to so many people wanting to subscribe to your software. Remember, this will likely be offered by all legacy orders within time too. Then potentially some robo-taxi income on top of that, perhaps also around 50 billion net profit, and by the end of the decade, which is kind of when I'm talking about well-tested, to be making a further $100 billion a year selling vehicles. Then other things on top of that, perhaps energy is another $50 billion. And like I said, robots are a bit of a wild card, a massive story with a lot of potential FOMO. Essentially Gen 3 scaled up FSD solved. And some rubber taxes out there. There's perhaps $200 billion a year profit coming in if you throw up a ratio of 30 on there. Then that is $6 trillion, or nearly 8 times today's stock price. That actually is quite good and far more rustic approach of where tests that will be by the end of this decade, or a stock price of around $2,000. This isn't really my exact price. I can't see Tesla reaching enough sales and batteries to get to 20 million by the end of this decade yet. But people I talk to who are more knowledgeable about global battery production around the world think it might be possible to hit more around 13 million. This is more of an if FSD itself by the end of the decade price. I think this would only require Tesla at a run rate of roughly 10 million vehicles a year. I understand that many investors are hoping for a price tag of $3,000. But there's a chance it might only be 50 more than what I suggested. Additionally, the stock price could rise, interest rates could fall, and Tesla's margins could increase. Even if that SD hasn't been fulfilled by then, it's probably going to be fairly good by then and worth paying for. Presumably if more people become aware of its benefits. Perhaps some will even advertise 10 million vehicles annually at a profit of $10,000 by then, which doesn't seem too drastic. Thanks for listening. Please hit the thumbs up and subscribe. Tesla should have reportedly saved thousands of dollars per long-range vehicle well before then, which is a huge savings. I would just like to see some more progress on Tesla actually moving to expanding manufacturing with the next model, which is likely to be the biggest selling vehicle in history.